friends, welcome back to another episode of the Field and Garden Podcast. It is your friend in flowers, Lisa Mason Ziegler, and I am so glad you decided to drop in and spend some time with me today. And today's guest is a career-long good friend, has become an invaluable part of my walk in my flower farming, my success, my supporter, my cohort, and I can't wait for us to have a chat with Dave Dowling. But before we do that, I thought I would share, how Dave and I met and how submerging yourself with like-minded people can really contribute so much more than you can ever imagine. So Dave and I started flower farming at about the same time. I think he was a year ahead of me. And I had joined the ASCFG, which is the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers, which is an education organization. And so I had joined, and back then, which we're talking 25 years ago, they used to have what were known as regional meetings. And so he was in Maryland, I was in Virginia, and he held a regional meeting at his farm. So I went. Steve actually went with me, funny enough, my husband, who is not a flower farmer. He drove me, and we went to Dave's farm. And the one thing that I remember that I was so impressed with about him is this was a season that it had rained for like 40 days and 40 nights. And what that means when it rains constantly, day after day after day for weeks, you can't do your garden chores. I mean, your farm chores, your garden chores, whatever you have. And they were barely able to finally mow like pathways and crops that had gone out right before we got there. And he actually, and this is how I learned how neat I could keep my garden edges by mowing, even though there might be a little bit of a mess in the middle. He had mowed right before we came some beds that were done, but they couldn't work the soil because it was too wet, right? There was like 8-foot tall weeds, but they looked great because the edges were mowed. You know what I mean? It was mowed into a uniform bed. And that was just a great lesson I learned that day. But most of all, I love that Dave just wasn't trying to hide that. It was just part of flower farming. It's just the way it was, right? And so he and I connected, and then through the years, we just came together. And then as we both started teaching and mentoring flower farmers, we were both heavily involved in the association, the ASCFG, on the board. He was the president multiple times, and I was on the board with him. Our relationship just grew, and I can say that every single time Dave Dowling and I have been together, whether it's for socializing or podcasting or doing a conference together or teaching classes, I always learn something. And that's why he was the very first person that I tapped on the shoulder to add as one of our instructors for our online courses. I did the basics first, and then when my students started having success, they said, I want to grow more crops. How can we do that? We're up and running now. We've got our sea legs. We want to grow more. And because I had taught with Dave in conferences, and I knew he was a great teacher. He had a teacher's heart, and he has got the name in the industry as the walking encyclopedia, y'all. And it is so true. He just sunshines information, and if you are in his presence, you get to absorb it. So, friends, before we jump into our podcast, I just want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com, and it's just one of the ways that we meet folks where they are in their cut flower gardening and farming journey. We also have Companion Field and Garden, the blog, the video resources. We have a YouTube channel. an online garden shop that stocks the same tools, seeds, supplies, and of course my books that you hear mentioned here. Other resources include our weekly live gardening shopping shows that happen inside our app. Plus, did you know we have courses for gardeners and farmers, long courses and short courses, whatever you need. We're here to help you grow great cut flowers. So, friends, to stay in the loop of all the happenings here at the Gardener's Workshop, you can request to be on our free farm news that drops timely how-tos, what's happening, and more at the Gardener's Workshop. All of this and more over at thegardenersworkshop.com and below in the show notes. So, friends, let's listen to my conversation with Dave Dowling on the top 3 perennials that pull their weight. Let's listen. So, Dave, it is so good for us I feel like we're back together again. We used to do so many lives and I've missed us connecting. And so for maybe that one person in the cut flower world or gardening world that may not know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how you came to be here?
Okay. Hi, Lisa. Good morning or afternoon, wherever people are listening to this. My name's Dave Dowling. I was a cut flower farmer in Maryland for 20 years. And when I stopped doing that, I went to work for a Edney flower bulb, selling bulbs to cut flower growers. And then that got sold to Fred Glockner Company. So I was then selling bulbs, perennials, plugs, all kinds of stuff. And then about 4 years ago, and right in the height of the pandemic, Ball Seed purchased the Fred Glockner Company. So then I worked for Ball Seed, worked with them for a little over 4 years. Then I sort of semi-retired this January. I'm still involved with the business. I just don't deal with individual customer accounts anymore, but I still work behind the scenes. I go to speak at conferences. I've been to Niagara Falls, Canada. I'm going to Vermont this fall. I've just did an online thing for the Missouri University. So a bunch of different stuff that I'm doing behind the scenes. I'll be at Ball headquarters for their customer days and perennial days this summer. I was also the president of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers, or ASCFG.org, if you want to look them up on the internet. As I'm sure Lisa's said many times, if you're serious about growing cut flowers, you really should be a member of that. If you're trying to do it as a business, that will almost guarantee your business will be successful as long as you put in the work and put in the time. The ASCFG is a huge, helpful tool to be a successful cut flower farmer.
You know, Dave, that's how we met.
Yes.
I think that's where I came to your farm for a meeting. Back then, we used to have regional meetings,
Right.
and I would just want to back that up what you just said. I mean, to submerge yourself with the people that are on the same journey as you makes
Mhm.
the difference between often failure and success,
Right.
right? I mean, to be able to, whether it's commiserating, ask questions, or whatever
Right.
it is. And so that was over 20 years ago. And
Right.
I mean, every time we get together and talk, I always learn something, just always hearing about the latest and greatest. And, so I know you're retired, but I do see you, as you mentioned, you're doing all this stuff. I see
Right.
you're semi-retired from
Right.
Ball. You're still leading your students in flower farming school.
Yep.
You're teaching and preaching about cut flowers. And, because I feel like I'm living the same way that you're living right now. We're living the good life after blood, sweat, and
Years.
tears for 25 years, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly. Out there in the
So,
mud and the sun and the heat and everything, but growing lots of flowers along the way.
and not even just growing, it's running the business part,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's what takes so many people down. And so we're going to jump into a great topic today, top 3 perennials that Dave Dowling says will pull their weight. But I want to say, talking just about the business part of flower farming, we want to acknowledge that it's not just about growing the flowers.
No.
A big portion, if not even a bigger portion, of what you have to figure out is the business side of things. And so we're not painting rainbows and unicorns here. This is really a great career and business to start, but you got to put the work in. You got to,
Yeah.
you know,
You got to put in the time
there's
and the hours and follow the rules and regulations and do everything, not just plant the seed and sell the flower. You got to do all the business part.
right. It's kind of like you got to give yourself learn the ropes or you're going to hang yourself with that rope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because I know after hearing you talk about these top three, everybody's going to want them and they're going to rush out and get them. And you may or may not be ready for that. But anyway, I'm just taking that with a little dose of
Yeah.
medicine. And so, Dave, what would you say? I want you to introduce some. We're going to talk through it. I'm not just going to say go, Dave. So, for a small flower farm, there are definitely some perennials that are better than others, right? For
Yes.
productiveness and for really being worth your investment, right?
Yeah.
And so part of that selection is let's start out with the very first one. And this is going to be no surprise to anybody. Are you going to
Yeah.
do your very favorite one
the,
first?
the best perennial that everyone should grow, as long as it grows in your zone. If you're a warm zone 8 or zone 9 or 10, you can't do it. But everyone else should have peonies growing on the farm and growing a lot of peonies. You plant them once, they're going to be there for your grandchildren to harvest. They're going to last you for many, many years. Every late May or early June, depending where you're at, you're going to be making money off those peonies forever. And if you do the right planning when you plant them, as far as weed management and spacing and irrigation and such. They're not that much work. You harvest the flowers in May or June when they're blooming and clean up the dead plants after the first hard freeze. And they're pretty self-sufficient. They don't take a lot of work. They can really return a lot of money as far as sales. My one thing I always like to say is, though, there's peonies that cost $4 or $5 each when you buy them, and there's ones that cost 60 and 70 or even 100. Some that are 30. The $6 or $5 peony is going to make you just as much money as that 50 or $100 plant. So there's no reason to buy those, unless you really want to collect some really unique varieties. But a pink peony, a white peony, and a red and a coral is all you need, and you're set.
You know, that is so true, Dave. I'm glad you said that because, I can remember when I first started out, I thought it was just so important, necessary, and the way everybody did it was to write the name, like instead of writing um, double voluptuous bloom snapdragon, thinking about Madam Butterflies,
Right,
I would write Madam Butterfly. They have no idea what Madam Butterfly is.
right,
It's the description, and it's so true with the peonies, whether you have that $100 plant peony because people automatically think, oh, I'm going to get more money for that. It does not work
no,
that way. They
no,
need a pink peony, and why not grow the most cost-effective, strongest grower for
yes,
you, right?
Sarah Bernhardt.
And so, what are some of those special, those best varieties that, in your opinion, are great growers and cost-effective and pretty across the board for everybody?
Yeah, I always like to say Sarah Bernhardt is the #1 peony that you should be growing as a cut flower. It's been around for over 100 years. I think 1918 or early, sometime in the 19 teens is when it was developed or created. Um, but I always like to say grow twice as many as those as any other color you do. So in other words, if you have the reddish color Kansas and you have 50 of those, you want 100 Sarah Bernhardt because you're going to need twice as many of those pinks as any other color you have. And you're going to sell every Sarah Bernhardt you grow. So Sarah Barnhart's #1. Other ones is Kansas for a red charm for a very, very red early bloomer. Coral charm is a coral color for early blooming. There's another one called Coral Sunset, which sometimes people think it's real similar to Coral Charm, but Coral Sunset starts out hot pink, turns to coral, and then fades to almost a blush. So it's not, it looks great in the garden, but you're not always sure what color it's going to be when you use it if you're selling it to a florist. If they get it on Wednesday and it's pink, it might be coral on Friday, and on Sunday it's going to be cream. So you got to be careful of that. It's a great peony. Just know that it doesn't stay the same color the whole time in the vase. Um,
May or may not be the best selection for a florist, right? Because that
right.
doesn't, right?
But for
That
a
might be
farmer's
that
market,
might
it's
be
fine.
great for your retail
Yeah,
customer that you can say, wait until you see this show unfold, right?
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
For a white, there's the Festiva Maxima, which is a white, 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 but it has little flecks of a burgundy in it. So it's not always a pure white for a wedding, but just as a peony in a vase, it's great. Um, you've got Henry Boxstock, which is another dark red. Those are great. Another white is Ann Cousins, which is a late blooming one. It's a little bit more expensive, maybe $10 or $12, but if you want a late white to extend your wedding season, that's great. So
Okay.
there's lots of peonies to grow. Some people even grow some of the singles as they cut flower. To me, it's not what I would want as a cut flower, but some florists or some retail customers may want them.
Well, in my experience, somebody gifted me when Steve and I got married. You know how you can
Mhm.
buy roots in those little bags at
Oh
the
yeah.
retail store? Well, somebody gave me some hot pink, or actually, I guess it's like fuchsia color.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
like royal uproar zinnia color is what it is. And I planted them, of course, and they are incredibly prolific. But they're singles, which means they don't last quite as long because they're just not
Right.
as many petals, right? However, they bloom like 10 days before any of the
Very
other
early.
peonies do.
Yes.
And they
Oh,
have that beautiful, those florets in the middle, those yellow,
yellow
they're
fuzzy
quite,
centers.
yeah. And so for me, as
Hmm.
when we were doing so many bouquets and we had so many cool flowers, it was great to have that focal flower
Early
in the
on.
beginning. So the moral of the story is not every flower is for every market, but you figure it out for what you want to grow, right?
Right. Yep. Another good
So,
one, if you're looking for a white one, is Duchess de Nemours. That's more of an all
oh
white,
yeah.
little creamier looking. And then another really good kind of a darker, brighter pink, almost Pepto-Bismol pink is Monsieur Jules LE is a good pink.
And Pepto-Bismol pink is pretty beautiful. You don't think
Oh,
it's
it's a
so
great
beautiful when
color.
you need to drink it, but
Yeah.
it is
But
a
but it's
good color.
but it's not the baby pink or the hot pink. It's that Pepto-Bismol pink, and it's great.
And I found, Dave, that while we appreciated having all the colors, especially I never grew red. Um, I appreciated having the colors for our bouquet program because we really depended on our peonies to be our focal flowers with all these
Yeah.
cool flowers that we grew. But for our floral customer, our florist, I mean, they will buy white anytime.
Yes.
So I feel like white is just such a great safe color. And one of the things I wanted to say before we started talking about perennials, because we have so many small growers that are not looking to build a huge farm. They're looking for, I don't want to call it a side hustle, but a part-time job, maybe selling some
Right.
bouquet subscriptions, that type of thing. I put peonies right up there with hydrangeas as far as if you plant them in the right place on your property,
Mhm.
even when you're not a flower farmer anymore, like me, I'm not in high production. My peonies, we appreciate and enjoy them so much because they're blooming like mad. They just get better with age,
Yeah.
right? So they're just a great investment for folks. I say that because I know that we have a lot of followers that are aspiring, beginner, and even just avid gardeners. And so all those peonies, even if you're not in it 100% yet, peonies are a lifelong for a garden lover, right?
Right. Great plant to have. Yep.
So Dave, talk to us about root size on peonies. What is, and I want to say that, I've moved my peonies 3 times since I've been a flower farmer, but my roots were not purchased. They were family roots and they
Mhm.
were huge. I could probably plant an acre of
Oh,
peonies with the roots that we have. So
yeah.
my peonies never really suffered. They never skipped a year of blooming because we were careful and did everything you told us to do. But they were huge. Talk about small roots and waiting for blooms and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yes, when you buy peony roots, you're going to get, they're sold by the number of eyes on the plant. Either 2 to 3 eyes, the smaller size, usually but a little bit cheaper, maybe 20% less price than a 3 to 5 eye. The 3 to 5 eye have 3 to 5 sprouts. So it'll be stems, possibly stems with flowers the first year they grow them. The 3 to 5 eye will typically give you flowers that you can harvest a year sooner than the 2 to 3 eye. So if you can afford that 20% higher price, I always recommend getting the 3 to 5 eye because you're going to make your money back usually a year sooner. Sometimes you'll buy a 2 to 3 eye, there might be some 3 to 4 eye in there. They're not always, that's the bare minimum. Sometimes it'll be a little oversized. Same with the 3 to 5 eye. Sometimes you get something that has 4, 5, or 6 eyes on it. That's okay, but they'll never be smaller than the size you order. Um,
Right.
each variety has a different size root mass. Sometimes they're like huge carrots that are, 8 inches, 10 inches long, sometimes little short stubby things. As long as they have a good amount of root mass, you should be fine. So in other words, a 3 to 5 eye plant can have less or smaller roots than a 2 to 3 eye, but you have more sprouts coming. It's just the nature of it. So don't be alarmed if you ordered two different varieties. One has 3 to 5 eyes and really big roots, and the other has a smaller root. The plants are still going to produce fine.
Good. That's really, really good to know.
Yeah.
So, where should small growers go to? And we'll put this resources in. So, where do you recommend people purchase these? How many times do we hear, oh my gosh, everybody, down at the big box store, they've
Right.
got 50% off roots. So, talk to us about where you get them and what's best.
Yeah. It's best to purchase them from a wholesale plant supplier, the same suppliers that supply the big cut flower growers, the big perennial growers. Like if you go to a garden center, they got the peonies in the 2 gallon pots. They bought the bare root somewhere from a wholesale supplier that's going to give you the best price. As an example, a Sarah Bernhardt 3 to 5 eye plant is around $5 when you buy a bag of 25 of that Sarah Bernhardt. If you go to the garden center, it's maybe $25 in a gallon pot, where you might find a little cardboard box at Tractor Supply for $9.99. But it's going to be much smaller 2 to 3 eye in that cardboard box at Tractor Supply versus the 3 to 5 eye that cost you $3 or $4 or $5 less from the wholesaler. The only thing with the wholesalers, you have to meet their minimums, buying the wholesale quantities, usually 25 per variety. Some places offer 10 or 15 per variety. But you just got to find that wholesaler. I work for Ball Seed. We have several of our suppliers offer them, either through Edney Flower Bulb, Walter's Perennials. Walter's Perennial is domestic grown in Michigan. They're a little more expensive, but they're really good, big, healthy roots. Our American Roots we sell for Leah Burbay. There's lots of different suppliers in the U.S., wholesale suppliers that you can get through Ball Seed, or there's other places also that are peony suppliers of wholesale peony roots. But you should never be buying retail if you're growing for sale, for profit.
Right, for business. Right,
Right.
right. And, I know that I hear you say, and I just want to say it here, you recommend like every fall adding, if you're not a big grower, adding 25 more. You don't have to
Yeah.
buy 500 at one time,
Right.
and it's really probably a really great way to stagger your planting. So, Dave, let's talk a little bit about care. And I think the best tip I ever heard for me personally, when you were here on our farm for our open farm one year, sharing that you should be sure to water your peonies in July and
Yes.
August because that's when they're making the buds for the next year. I mean, because frankly, you want to know what happens here? Once those peonies are done blooming, they are
Forget
on
about
their
them.
own, you
They're on their
know?
own, right? Yeah.
So let's
So
tell us about care.
yeah, especially the first year you plant them. Say you planted them last October, you make sure they're watered all season this year, watered and weeded, and it's a little bit of fertilizer just before they come up, and then again in late summer. So they have the energy and the moisture and the water to be able to get a bigger root system and push up more eyes next year. If you don't, a 3 to 5 eye peony is still going to be 3 to 5 eye next year because you didn't give it any water this summer. Especially if I have a long summer drought, no rain in July and August, those peonies are suffering. If you look out there and you see the weeds are dying, those peonies are not happy. So make sure you keep them watered. The other thing I recommend is to grow them for weed control, is grow them in the black landscape fabric. The only thing is if you're farther south and you're trying to push the envelope where sometimes they're not getting enough cold in the winter, the black fabric doesn't let the ground get as cold in the winter, so you might not be able to do it like in zone 8B or 8. But zone 7 and colder, that black landscape fabric is amazing for keeping the weeds out, keeps them out of the aisles. You just have to weed each little spot where the plant is, but it really does cut down your weeding. And I recommend instead of burning a big circle, cut an X. And if you can melt that X, it's even better. So then the flaps of that X go back down and
Yeah.
lay on the ground, keep up the weeds, but the peony is strong enough to push through that X. You may have to enlarge it every few years as the plants expand, but weed control anywhere on the farm is your most troublesome and your most expensive thing. So if you can control them before they happen, you're saving money. So by growing in the landscape fabric, you're saving money for the next 50 years.
And Dave, so what is your recommendation? I see so much controversy online. When do you start cutting the darn flowers?
Yeah, I was just thinking today, I want to buy 25 peonies and plant 2 batches next to each other and harvest one when I say it's ready and leave the other one for 4 years like some people, or 5 years like they say, and count stems for the first 10 years and see what happens. I'm positive or 100% or 99% sure that as soon as that peony has a stem that has a good flower, and you can pick that flower and leave lots of foliage on the plant, you're not going to hurt the plant. But again, if you planted last October, you're not going to pick anything the first year. Just don't. Even if it has a flower, don't pick it then because it hasn't grown its new root system in. But that very second year, if there's a flower that you can pick, don't pick it longer than you need. Pick that flower, leave lots of foliage in the plant, keep it watered, keep it fertilized. You're not going to damage that plant. And you start making money back sooner to pay for it and buy more.
And so is there benefit to disc bud, like when that, you planted it last October and it's got a
Right.
few buds, to just pop them off so it doesn't even have to waste energy?
Correct. You can disc bud them that very first year, although a lot of people recommend leave at least one to bloom to make sure you got the color you ordered. Because you don't want
Oh,
to
that's a
find
good
out
point.
2 years
That's a
later that,
great,
oh, I ordered pink and they're white, or, it's the wrong color.
right.
Most wholesale suppliers, if you come back 2 years later and it's the first year, let them bloom and it's wrong, they'll honor a credit if it's wrong. But if you can find it the
And
first year,
mistakes happen.
oh, mistakes
Stuff
happen. Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. There's
I
no
mean, just,
stopping it.
yeah. So let's talk about harvesting and like what stage and what your recommendation is on that.
Yeah, peonies are harvested for the cut flower business in the marshmallow stage, they call it, where the bud is not quite open. That green calyx, the outer green shell is split open a little bit. You can see the color of the flower and it's squishy a little bit. You get to the point where you can just look at them and tell. You don't have to be squeezing them, but it should be soft, but not mushy. So then it's going to be able to open up. That green has to definitely be separated. And then when you harvest them, you can either put them in the water and sell them the next day, and they'll open for the customer in a day or two. And store them in the cooler in water for a week to 10 days. Or if you need to store them longer than that, you store them dry in the cooler, you pick them, never put them in water, wrap them in paper and store them in the cooler. Some people say you store
38 degrees, 38
36,
degrees,
38, as close to
36.
freezing as you can get it. Um,
Yeah.
but you want to make sure they're very dry when they're put in there, wrapped in paper. Then when you're ready to sell them, you take them out the day before, recut the stems, rehydrate, and then put them back in the cooler once they're hydrated. But then the ones that the longer you store them dry, the less they're going to last in the vase as a cut flower. So you wouldn't store them for 8 weeks to then sell them to somebody expecting to look good on the kitchen counter for a week. You sell them 8 weeks later for a wedding, they got to look good for 8 hours.
Right, right, for event type
Right.
stuff.
But then I still always recommend you're better off selling it today than maybe selling it in 8 weeks when it might get botrytis, might get mold, might not work well. So bird in the hand's
You
worth
know,
two.
I am there with you. It's like people say, "Oh, well, why don't you do you dry that flower?" It's like we would, last case need. I mean, we try to sell everything the day after
Right.
it was harvested,
Yeah.
right? Always choose it because there's stuff that goes wrong. There's more work involved, more labor, everything.
Yeah. I would say real quick, one thing about peonies, I'd rather see a grower get them ready early than trying to store them in the cooler and sell them later. And to get them early, you just put a low tunnel over them about 4 weeks
Right.
before they normally sprout, and they'll bloom 2 to 3 weeks earlier, which is really helpful for people in like zone 7 and maybe zone 6 to get them ready for Mother's Day. Because Mother's Day for a local flower
Yes.
farm is the biggest day of the year. And if you get your peonies to bloom for Mother's Day, you've just increased your sales tremendously. Plus, you still have other ones 2 weeks later, they're blooming in the field.
Right. Right. Just so much wisdom in that, Dave. You know what I mean? It's we can read all the book smarts that we want, but when you experience it firsthand, there's
Yes.
just, I mean, the tunnel thing, because I know that we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I know that you can do that with tulips and so many other
Yeah.
things. And that's just great. All right, anything else you want to say about peonies before we shift gears and go to sedum?
Well, I just want to say, especially newer growers who are starting the business, the sooner you get those peonies planted, the better, because the sooner you're going to be making that income every year off of them. And if by chance you missed last fall, it's okay to plant them this spring. It's not going to be the best, but it's still going to be good. It's better to, if you missed last fall, go ahead and plant them this spring rather than wait till next fall. So, the sooner you
Just
get them, the
water
better.
them.
Fall is the best, and water. Water is the most important thing.
Yeah. Water, water, water. All
Yeah.
right, Dave, what is the perennial number 2 that really is worth its weight for somebody to get in the ground?
Yeah, almost I got 2 of them for that, but I would say number 2 would be Baptisia.
Oh, okay.
Baptisia is one of those plants that you plant it once, it's there forever. There's the original blue called Baptisia australis. It's just that indigo blue, also called false indigo sometimes. is the common name for it. But it blooms about the same time as peonies. So if you make a mixed
Mm.
arrangements, it works great with it. It gives you that spiky flower in the blue color. Or there's, with new breeding the past probably 15 or 20 years, there's lots of new colors out there. There's a bright yellows. There's I'm going to call it a mauve color, pink colors. There's a white, lots of different colors. Most of the newer varieties are from Proven Winners, which is the plant company that produces new plants and patents it. One thing I want to point out is if you do buy Proven Winner Baptisia, either bare root or liners, which a liner is a rooted plant, you don't have to buy the Proven Winner pot. They won't require you. Normally they make you buy the Proven Winner pot because they want their pots, all of their plants to be in their brand name pots. But if you buy it for a cut flower farm, you're planting it in the field, you don't have to buy that pot. And sometimes the pots are $1 each. And the worst thing you can do is you order 100 Baptisia plants, get 100 pots you're not going to use, and you spend $100 you didn't need to spend. So make sure wherever you order those plants, I know with Ball Seed, we have a system to take them off the order and never get them put on there. But if you order from somewhere else, whether it's directly from Proven Winners or Walter's Gardens, just make sure they know you're a cut flower farm, planting them in the field, and you are exempt from having that pot requirement. And if anybody gives you a hard time, get in touch with me. I have a letter from the people that started Proven Winners that says cut flower growers don't have to buy the pots.
There you go.
So that's really
It's not
important.
what you know, it's who you know.
So yeah. So I've got that letter saved in my computers from the man who started Proven Winners that says no, cut flower growers don't have to buy the pots. So
Dave, first off, what is a liner? Let's explain
well,
what that is.
people are probably familiar with you do your soil blocking. So those are always what would be considered a plug because it's something grown from a seed. A liner is grown from a rooted cutting. Sometimes you could use your soil blocks and do a rooted cutting in there, like you would
Right.
for Calvulocantha. And then it's technically a liner, not a plug or a soil block.
So they come in a tray,
So
is
it
that
comes in a
how they're?
tray, usually a lower number, 32, 50, 72, maybe as much as 100 plants in a tray. The plastic
Okay.
tray is like a plug tray, but it's called a liner because it's a rooted cutting. A plug in the business is grown from seed.
Never grown Baptismia. I bought actually a plug tray from Bob Woolham
Oh, wow.
way back in the beginning of time, and we planted them. And that's back when I was still battling voles so
Oh,
incredibly badly. And they literally ate all of it. And I
yeah.
just never really tried again. So I've heard people talk about using this foliage like
Yes.
almost as much or more than the blooms. And describe what it looks like and how that all
Yeah.
works.
If you've ever seen a soybean plant, it's kind of like oval leaves, a little waxy looking. Those are the green leaves. Works great as a filler. Then also when the flower finishes, they make seed pods that are almost like a soybean, kind of an oval, green, fuzzy pod about the size of the end of your pinky. And then if you don't use them when they're green and fuzzy, they turn black and shiny by September and October. So you got all these different options or times that you can sell the Baptisia as a cut. Flowers, foliage, green pods, and all sorts of black pods later on. But my rule of thumb is you can pick every flower on a Baptisia. You're not going to hurt the plant because there's so many other stems coming up that are just foliage. And the plants are sometimes 4 or 5 feet tall, and you're going to cut a 2-foot stem. You're still leaving 2 feet of foliage on that stem.
Right.
So you're not going to damage the plant by picking every flower.
I may have to grow this, Dave.
Yeah. And then when you're picking the foliage, you could pick half of the foliage throughout the summer. And then by early to mid-September, if it still looks good and hasn't been, you forgot to water it and, it doesn't look
Right.
pretty.
Tattered and all that
Right.
stuff.
You could clear cut it in September and you wouldn't hurt the plant. Baptisia is a tough plant. I would like to say it's so tough that the root systems, like if you definitely want to make sure when you plant it, you're never going to have to move it. Because when it gets a root
Oh,
system, it's like a tree. It's like digging up an oak tree. When I finished my farm, I told people you could have it. One person dug up a plant. A couple of people tried, they couldn't get them dug up because it's just so solid mass. It's like digging in concrete. So make sure you plant it where you want it. It's also one that's really good to plant in the landscape fabric because it stays as a clump that just gets bigger every year for
yeah.
weed
That's good.
control. But some of the new colors are just amazing. There's the pink, the white, light blue, purple. Like I said, a lot of those are proven winners. There's also some that are other breeders that aren't with the proven winner pots. Just depends where you buy it. Different suppliers offer different brands, so to speak.
No, I remember from your course, that we had pictures that we used in the course
Hmm.
of your yellow that you grew
Yes,
on your farm. I mean,
very
and
yellow.
y'all, I mean, yellow and orange are like my
Yeah,
favorite colors.
yeah,
And I still think about that yellow Baptismia. It was
yeah.
so incredibly beautiful.
I would say the only thing about
So,
the yellow doesn't grow as tall as the others. There's a variety called Twilight
oh,
Prairie Blues that grows to be 4 to 5 feet tall. The yellow is only 36 inches tall. So it's very different height. Still works great. It's just not as big in the garden.
right, right, huh? So, Dave, what's a source for these guys?
Again, of course, you can order them through Ball Seed or any wholesaler has them. Places like Walter's Gardens, they offer them both as bare root and as liners. The bare root, you buy 25 plants. The liners, you're usually getting 72 per variety. So it depends how much you want to spend. The bare root costs more, but you don't have to buy as many because to getting 72 of one color is a lot of Baptisia. So you may
Yeah.
only need 25, depending how big your farm is.
Although, Dave, I'm telling you, the number one thing I get, and not number one of the things that I get asked about all the time is more filler, more foliage. And so
Yeah,
if they really took care of and kept them weeded, kept them watered, that could be a foliage source all
foliage
season,
all
couldn't it?
summer. Yes. Yep, definitely.
I mean, that sounds easier to me than beating the bushes in other places, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good point that liners, you have to buy more of one color. And do you or don't you really need that many? Or get together with your
Mm.
friends, your flower
Right.
farming friends, and
Split and
split an
trade.
order,
Yeah.
right? Um, so what are do you have some favorite varieties? I know you mentioned a blue one
Yeah.
earlier. So what
The
are
the
the
original one,
varieties?
original was called Baptisia australis, which is just a typical blue. But now there's ones called Cherries Jubilee, which is kind of a butterscotchy color.
Ooh,
There's, I'm looking at the list here, Pink Truffles, which is a pinkish bluish color. The white one is called Vanilla Cream, which is really good. White.
those are
That one's
great names.
always in short supply though, so you got to sometimes order that a year in advance so they hold them for you. There's one Twilight Prairie Blues. It's not a proven winner, it's just a regular hybrid. That's a mauve color, and that's one that I grew that was the 5 feet tall. And one plant
Wow.
after 3 years was putting up 50 stems of flowers. So they're very big, very productive, and very fast. So definitely would recommend if you don't have the Baptisia on your farm, you should give it a try. It's deer resistant, and didn't mention before, peonies are also deer proof almost. I never had a deer eat a peony. Um, I never had insect problems on the Baptisia except for 1 year. Some moth or butterfly came and laid eggs, and I came home one day, literally, and the plants were stripped, a whole little section. There were no leaves left, and they just little teeny caterpillars on them. Didn't kill the plants next year. They were fine. I'd already picked the flowers earlier. This was probably like
Right.
August, but it was just like it never had that whatever moth or butterfly did that 1 year, and that was it. Never came back. So it's a really good tough plant.
So what stage do you harvest the flowers for fresh flower use?
Yeah, well, it's a spike of flowers. So like most spike flowers, like snapdragons, larkspur, delphinium, they are ethylene sensitive. So they're better to leave them on the plant for another 2 days than put them in the cooler for 2 days. Because in the field, they're not getting ethylene problems. In the cooler,
Good
they will.
point.
But you want to harvest them when they're about a third of the flower stalk is opened. It can be half or even 3/4 if you need to wait because they're ready on Wednesday, but your market is on Saturday. Better
Right.
to leave them on the plant than put them in the cooler. It's definitely not when you want to put it and load the truck the night before the market. You're better off leaving them sitting out in the barn or the shed overnight than put them up in the closed truck overnight. Because that locked in that ethylene, you open the door the next morning and the lower petals will be falling off.
It's a great tip,
Yeah.
Dave. See, I learn something every single time. I never thought about that with snaps and larkspur
Yeah.
about, I mean, we didn't put them in the cooler for that very reason. We
Right.
have killed many. I mean,
Right.
toasted many blooms that way. But
Another
that's
one
a
that does
really,
that is Salvia. Very ethylene sensitive. So you definitely don't put that in the truck the night before you go to the market because it'll just shed like crazy.
and so is that kind of a spike flower trait or
It
or is
is.
it very
It's a
specific?
it's a spiked flower trait. Yes, a lot of spiked flowers are more ethylene sensitive. Don't know why. It's just as a rule of thumb, almost every spiked
Right.
flower is ethylene
It's
sensitive.
all science, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, And so we just said it's better not to put them in the cooler because they are so ethylene sensitive.
Right.
So that's a great tip. Anything else? I mean, so as far as harvesting the foliage, so it hydrates really well, I would guess, and so
It
much people
hydrates
love it.
okay. Sometimes if you pick a bucket full of foliage, you might have a couple of stems that don't hydrate. So that's why it's always best to pick it the day before. The foliage can go in the cooler or leave it in the barn overnight. And then you got 3 stems that wilt to pull those out and trash them. Same thing like you do with the um, hibiscus. Sometimes you have a few that wilt and the other ones would be perfect for 2 weeks for the
And you know what else does that? And I can remember John Dole talking about this is Indian summer rudbeckia. There
Yes.
is just a freak. It's like you'll have
Yep.
you'll have 200 stems and there's 10 in
That
there
just
that
didn't
just
do it.
wilt and they've studied it. There is no rhyme or reason,
Yeah. So you just pull
right?
those out and throw them away.
Exactly. And move on about your business, right?
Yeah.
All right. So anything else we want to talk about Baptismia?
Other than just, again, like the peonies, if you're going to plan on being in the cut flower business long term, the sooner you plant them, the sooner you start making the money off of them.
Yeah.
And just know that each plant does get to be about 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter, the foliage part of the plant. So you space them 18, 24 inches apart down the row.
Because you don't want to move them.
You don't want to move them ever, ever.
Yeah. Unless you're married to a man. I have an excavator that lives in my
Right. That
house.
would work.
I
Yes.
get that boy to dig up more stuff. I mean, it's like it's a dream, Dave. I will tell you, it
And
is
he
a
gets
dream.
and he gets to play with his big toys too.
Yes, yes. All right. So what's number three of the perennials that are worth their weight in gold?
Is sedum. Some
I
people think
agree.
sedum is just, not worth it. It's a hassle to grow, but it is so easy to grow. The variety Autumn Joy is the #1 to grow as a cut flower. There's some other ones. There's one called Matrona, has a darker leaf. There's a new one out that's, I think it's called Black Knight. I'd have to look at the name again. It's really dark black foliage. That Autumn Joy, you can't go wrong with it. It's has a flower head usually in early July. You can sell it green. You can let it bloom in August and sell it when it's blooming. And even when the flowers are old and I don't want to say dead, but they're drying, you can still use it. It doesn't get ugly when the flower fades. So you got 3 times you can sell it. It's a variety that's been around forever. It's not patented, so you're welcome to pick all the cuttings you want, off your plants. And my grandmother used to call it live forever because you would take a stem, break it off, stick it in the ground, and it would grow. So it's very
Yep.
easy to make more plants if you want to start your own in plug trays or pots and plant them out, or just if you have a plant, cut stem sections and just put them in the ground and make more.
And didn't you find, I don't believe that we don't net peonies. I don't think anybody nets Baptismia, but in my experience, I did grow a lot of Autumn Joy sedum. And I want to mention, I actually harvested it really earlier than July,
Very
Dave, when it
early.
was only green, when it
Just
was
green,
just
yeah.
solid. Because if you're hungry for foliage
It's
and you got
there.
a lot of sedum, it'll just do great. But we had to net it because it got so tall and it will quickly lay down a little bit
Or
and then
spread
the
open in the
stems.
middle. Right.
Yes. And so netting early really was a great intervention. And I was going to say it is easy enough to propagate that literally if you dropped your strippings in the right place or trimmed off some
You
stems in
might.
the garden, they will root
Yes, right.
in a good way.
Yeah. And it's also the one that because it roots so easy, it's a cheap plant to buy. A plug tray, there's 70 cents a plant, which is pretty cheap. For perennials, you're
Easier
getting
than doing it yourself.
a tray of 50 or 72. I was thinking something else about them. But they're definitely a great plant. I was thinking, you're saying how they will sometimes get a big clump and they'll fall apart in the middle. I like to
Right.
plant them, like if you're planting a new bed, plant them every 6 inches. So they're kind of
Oh,
crowded. They'll have the center won't fall over and the sides might lean. What happens when you get one plant that has a lot of room, you get this big clump that might have 50 stems that come up, but then it kind of like breaks apart in the middle and they all fall out. But if you plant them
so
really close
crowd
together,
them.
right, which I saw at, I can't, Gary and Sybil Calder down in North Carolina 15 years, 20 years ago. They had them close together and theirs were 4 feet tall because they were just really tall. You don't want to overwater them because the roots are rot. They're a succulent type plant, so you don't want to overwater them.
Right.
But they had really good soil, kept them fertilized, watered them just enough, and they had the best sedum I've ever seen. tall plants, perfect sized flower heads that were 2.5 to 3 inches across. Because sometimes when you put up a stem the stem's thicker than your thumb or really thick, and the flower head is 6 inches across, which is almost too big. So by having them crowded like that, you get smaller flowers and longer stems.
Kind of like sunflowers, right?
Yes, you can sort of regulate the
Like
size.
just really pack them in. Yeah, and I know, Dave, I was just sitting here thinking to myself, if somebody invested in these three perennials and no other perennials for
Yeah.
a while, these will really float your boat along with companions as to other things that you're growing on your flower farm, right?
Yeah, because you would have the peonies and Baptisia blooming late May or early June, and then the Baptisia foliage all summer, and then your sedum is again from July, August, and early September. So you got some
Right.
flowers all season to put in your mixed bouquets to sell by the stem. And something else I used to do with the sedum is when we sold it at the farmers market, we used to tell people, well, all the other flowers are dead, go stick the sedum in the ground and it'll grow. And I don't
Yep.
know how
Yeah,
many,
you know what? I remember we used to tell people, and people love that.
yeah, I don't know how
People
many
really,
plants of sedum are around the DC area that came from my flower stand. Hundreds probably.
and and so this would be the same source that like Walters or
Oh,
Ball or
Walters,
somebody.
you can order through Ball, you can order Walters through Ball, which one thing to point out, Walters Gardens, if you order direct from them, they have a higher minimum. If you order through Ball Seeds, you only got to buy one tray or one bag of 25. So they're,
So explain that a little bit because I know that
no,
people aren't familiar how that kind of y'all
yeah,
are like a broker.
we're Ball Seed is a broker. We sell for a lot of different companies like Edney, Ball Tagawa, which is a plug producer in California, North Creek and Creek Hill Perennials in Pennsylvania. But Walters Gardens will sell direct to you, but they have a higher minimum. You have to, I think it's 4 trays of liners or 100 plugs or 100 bare root. But if you order through Ball, you can order just one bag of bare root or one tray of liners because Ball sells so much for Walters.
Right.
So,
Right.
and the other thing, when you order from Ball Seed, you set up your account, you don't pay for anything until it ships to you. So if you're ordering peonies for September or October delivery, you don't pay for them now. You pay for them when they get delivered to you in October, which is really helpful for a farmer's cash flow because everybody knows you can't spend the money until you have it, but you can make money all
Right.
summer and pay for your peonies in October as opposed to paying for your peonies now when you might not have that much cash flow.
And I mean, a lot to be said, especially nowadays. It just seems like so many varieties of stuff really sells out. Like I know this podcast will drive so much sales for those varieties that you have spoken of. So the
Right.
moral to the story is, especially, and we buy a lot from Ball, that you can place I'm going to say it again, you can place your order now, but you don't actually get billed until it gets shipped to you. So why would you
Right.
not?
Yeah.
And I know that's just
Yeah.
another thing. I'm just thinking about your course, Dave. I'm just, so many things are coming through in my mind that so many tips like this about when you buy, what sizes you should buy, what varieties you should buy, and then how you
Mhm.
space them. All of this is what really leads to success. Instead of henpecking all over. And as we know, because we counsel the people that have henpecked and bought either landscape tulips or spread them out and they got too big, too tall, or whatever, or too fat, and they're not usable as cut flowers.
Or
There's just
my
so
big thing
many tips.
is when people buy the 12-inch tall perennials because so many new perennial varieties, whether it's sedum, phlox, yarrow, they're breeding these ones that are 8 or 12 inches tall. And
Yep.
you see the pretty picture of the flower, but the plant's going to not be tall enough for a cut flower. So you got to really be careful of that. And in my class, I name these are the varieties to buy. These are the ones that are tried
Right.
and true. They're going to be tall. They're going to work. Don't make
And
those
there's a
expensive
reason for
mistakes.
that.
Yes.
Suzanne and I actually, my sister, filmed. We went to a big box store. I won't say the name. It's a reel. It got tons and tons of action. And it was me like, oh, I held it up. Oh, look, it's azuratum. Oh, that is such a beautiful cut flower. Oops, this one
4 inches
only
tall.
grows 8 inches tall.
I,
It's a
I saw
bedding
that.
plant.
I saw
And
that
it's
video.
and it's so easy to fall for that. And when you
Yeah.
start investing money in bulbs and perennials and woodies, it is big money, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lot of money to invest and lose it all, right? I mean, what the heck do you do with a sea of, I can't remember what example you talked about in your course. Somebody had bought a bunch of shrubs and they only grew 12 inches, and lo and
Yes,
behold, it
they
was a
bought the
bedding
dwarf.
shrub,
It was a dwarf variety. Yep.
a dwarf. There's the
Yeah, it was
word.
a dwarf
Um,
Nandina it was.
Yeah. So, Dave, I think that these were three great pull their weight perennials. And I think they're great recommendations for especially aspiring and beginner flower farmers to start thinking about, and again, we want to say, you really don't do high investment until you're actually got your business started. You have some customers, you're selling some flowers. You don't learn to be a flower farmer on perennials and bulbs and
No,
stuff, right?
no,
I
it's the
mean,
next step.
exactly. It's the future of your business, and how much better to learn the ropes and then use the rope to climb higher instead of hanging yourself with
Right.
it, right? And
I'll also say you don't want to plant all these long-term crops that are going to be there for years if you're not sure you really want to do this as a business long-term. We all know Nicole at Flower Hill Farm.
yes,
She took my class and she had been growing for a year or two because she had taken your class first, I think. And she planted a
yes,
whole lot of the woody shrubs and things that I recommended in the class. And now she's really happy she has that because she's got her nursery now and takes a
yes,
lot of her time. So she doesn't get as much of the annuals and stuff planted on the cut flower farm, but
right.
it's all the perennials and the woodies that are producing lots of flowers for her.
Yeah, and you can never anticipate where your journey is going to go. I mean, you and I are both great
You can
examples of that.
plan,
We
but
just
plans
loved
change.
flower farming. We did it. We did it successfully for a couple of decades, both of us selling and hustling. And then we built and piggybacked on that. So you're so very, very right. And there's rhymes or reasons, and it's just great. I want to just mention again that joining the ASCFG and then pairing yourself with folks that are doing or have done successfully what you want to do. So, Dave,
Yeah,
thanks so much for taking some time with me today because you are a busy guy. And I appreciate it so very, very much. And so you've proven those perennials certainly pull their weight.
definitely. Buckets full when it's blooming every year. Truckfuls if we plant enough of them.
All right, friends, until we meet again, see you later, Dave.
All right, bye-bye, Lisa.
All right, friends, what do you think? I mean, those are three just workhorse great places to jump off into the perennial pool. And I want to also remind everyone that Dave is the instructor of Flower Farming School Online, Perennials, Bulbs, Woodies, and more. And this is a course that will serve you for the life of your flower farming career. It is set up literally like an encyclopedia. It goes through so many bulbs and so many perennials, and Dave tells you everything: how to grow them, which ones to grow, which size to buy, where to get them. And he even at the end of the course takes you on a little preview of what it's like to grow in houses. He sold his flowers. His farm was in Maryland. He sold year round at the DuPont market in Washington, D.C., which is huge. And so he learned how to even produce crops during the winter. And he just gives you a little snapshot of that to really whet your appetite. And just if you make it this far, friends, we then have the perfect instructors to carry you the rest of the way. And that is Steve and Gretel Adams of Sunny Meadows Flower Farm. They are the last piece in the Flower Farmer Flower Farming School online courses. Their course is called Growing Cut Flowers in Hoop and Greenhouses. And they are just like Dave. They spill so much information that you're set with the full series of Flower Farming School. They are definitely standalone courses, but as you build and start your business and you go through the series, you just have an incredible foundation that you have lifetime unlimited access to. And I invite you to check them all out. You'll find them all over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And friend, I hope to see you in school. Ciao.